Welcome to CISO Insider, Nightfall's chat with Chief Information Security Officers. We host CISOs from different industries to discuss their pathways to the role, the challenges they face in their everyday work, and lessons they can share with anyone aspiring to become a CISO. This podcast brings you into the world of cybersecurity and gives you a window into the most brilliant minds in the business. I'm Chris Martinez. Today on CISO Insider, it's our Season 3 premiere with Acquia VP of Security and CISO Robert Former. He discusses his experiences as a cybersecurity leader and how radical transparency has helped him at every step of his career, making the right decisions for his org by accepting the appropriate levels of risk, effectively managing data security and compliance in a platform-as-a-service environment, and maintaining the connections necessary to make remote work successful. We also get into what ethical hacking really means and the importance of securing user data in his dual role at Acquia as a steward of security operations and governance. You'll hear the straight talk with a sense of humor on cybersecurity in our chat with Robert today. Please join me in welcoming Robert to CISO Insider. Today I'm joined by Robert Former, who is the CISO and VP of Security at Acquia. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me here, Chris. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. So first, we're going to get into some questions about data security fundamentals. In your own words, why is data security so important to you in your role and for your company?
Data security is almost a personal crusade for me. As a penetration tester, I've been able to find, frankly, how easy it is in many cases to leverage simple mistakes that are made and gain an unholy amount of information. So just personal observation has brought that to me. In my role, of course, security is important because I'm the VP of security. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer. So in the sense of the buck stops here, I am where that buck stops when it comes to security. I have to answer to the CEO, the board, and our clients, most importantly. And for my company, we take on a lot of client data. We're a platform as a service. So we're not just taking on our clients' data, but we're also taking on our clients' data. So there's several layers of responsibility here. And once again, ultimately, the buck stops with me.
Can you talk a little bit about the positive impacts of ethical hacking? And what do you think people really need to know about this discipline that they may not know?
Ethical hacking is an essential part of this industry anymore because so much is done over the internet. And there are so many places that things can go sideways, whether through just simple mistakes or malicious code, just so many ways it can go wrong. And my personal experience has been that the best way to catch a thief is to hire a thief. And ethical hacking is fun. The results can be important for an organization, which is why I feel it's important for organizations to engage with ethical hacking. It's actually best, in my view, to start internally with a red team because your own folks know best and they will learn first from the experience. External ethical hacking, penetration testing, in many cases, it's even a regulatory requirement anymore. So it's people hear the word hacking and they think immediately negative connotations, but the original meaning of the word hacking was to just get in there and try and figure something out. It was not a negative connotation. And ethical hacking or ethical pen testing is the same thing. You're in there to learn, you're in there to find things, you're in there to fix things. So I think that the industry needs to remain focused that, there really are good guys, good girls, good them doing this across the industry.
You've worked in many different sectors over your career, from IoT to the energy sector, and now maintaining Drupal websites in AWS. What security lessons have been relevant for you across the board in these roles, and how has working across these different sectors been different?
One of the chief lessons that I've taken away from every single one of these roles has been, going back to the ethical hacking and the red teaming, the ability to learn from both your own mistakes and other people's mistakes improves the quality of the product. It improves the quality of the code. I really started to get into this when I was working in the energy sector on smart meters. The team that I worked with at that company, they were fantastic. They were receptive. We had an intense and very effective internal research team, making certain that the product that we pushed out the door it was as safe as we could reasonably make it. And that was important because the product we were pushing out the door at that time, that was literally in cases a life or death type of device. If somebody cuts power to somebody who's on, a ventilator or some important piece of medical equipment in their house, you can do extensive damage. So it became really important to me to make certain that we were addressing the need in the same way that the risk was there. And from there, I moved into financial industry, SaaS, data centers, platform as a service for two companies now. And that's just reinforced all of those lessons for me. It's easy for things to slip through the system. It's easy for things to slip past the automated tools. It's not enough to just take one pass with an automated tool. You actually need to get the human in there. The more layers, the more checks you have, as long as you keep it reasonable and you can still release your code, the better quality code you're going to release and the safer your users are going to be.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about your work at the energy company because the next question is about your work specializing in security research in the energy sector. Can you speak to the work you did in that role and share a clear picture of what security research is with our listeners?
So when I was in the energy sector, I sort of fell into it. I was working for a consulting firm at the time, and we were contracted by a sizable energy company on the West Coast. And we were brought in to look at the security program and controls that were available on smart meters. When we were done with our assessment, we found that it was left wanting to a certain degree. And I found that to be rather disturbing. At the time, there was a great deal of bad press going around about smart metering and smart energy. People making all sorts of ridiculous claims about getting headaches because it's got RF in it and things like that. It's just tinfoil hat stuff, crazy. But shortly after that project ended and the report was issued, that company that made the meters I was working on came to me and offered me a position testing their meters. They had taken to heart that they needed an external perspective. They needed an objective perspective. I didn't have any skin in the game as far as the quality of the code, other than it be as good as it possibly could be. So I could be truly objective within the company. And that was a really important lesson for me because I've carried that forward both as a security researcher and in leadership. Security research it's a slightly broader than just ethical hacking. Security research means that you're digging into the elements of the product and the software and hardware itself. And you're part of the process from inception, from ideas, through initial design, through testing, integrating security. Each of those steps, you utilize security research to find out what could be done. Because security research is really the art of figuring out what a system will do when you try to make it do something it shouldn't. Quality testing is making certain it does what it should. My job is to figure out what can I make it do by telling it to do something different. That's the fundamental differentiator.
How did you get involved with writing and social media publishing on platforms like Security SockMonkey, Security Facepalm Blog, and Dark Reading?
It started off, Security Facepalm is my personal favorite because this is a place for security practitioners to come together and talk about silly things that we've run into throughout our career. One of my favorites was a story that one of my peers told me about a client of hers who insisted that they wanted to get a D- on a PCI audit. Now, anybody who's dealt with PCI understands there is no D-, there is pass, there is fail. But the driver behind this, the story this really told, was that they wanted to put the absolute bare minimum work into their security in order to convince people to buy their product. They weren't actually interested in the security, they were interested in the certification. That's a major disconnect. And that's what sort of got me started. I started contributing to the industry where I could, either as a guest poster or on my own blogs. And I've been invited to work some articles for Dark Reading and some other places because honestly, this is almost, I'm not going to say religious for me, but it is extremely important. And I do like to evangelize the usefulness of knowing what's on your own system and the difference that an objective security perspective makes.
We're going to take a brief break and get back to more questions with Robert Former from Acquia. You're listening to CISO Insider from Nightfall AI.
Nightfall DLP is the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution designed for high-growth companies securing sensitive data across cloud apps like Slack, GitHub, and Google Drive. Traditional data security solutions are painful to implement, require heavy overhead, and have high false positive rates. Nightfall customers are up and running in minutes with our library of machine learning detectors to protect PII, PHI, and other industry-specific data. Our developer-centric platform allows security teams to configure content inspection as code for customizable data protection. Learn more at cisoinsider.com/nightfallai.
Now let's get into some questions about compliance and the security leader role. What are the unique challenges when managing cybersecurity responsibilities in a platform as a service environment, especially around compliance?
Platform as a service is a unique middle ground between infrastructure as a service and software as a service. The key differentiator is that you share security and compliance responsibility with the client. So there's a line. That line can be somewhat fuzzy at times between what we as a PaaS provider are responsible for, which is things like making certain that the OS is properly patched and that the supporting apps inside the instance are kept up to date, and that we're managing them appropriately, both from a software perspective and from a delivery perspective. But there's a point at which the customer has to take responsibility for some of the security and the compliance as well, because you're writing and executing your own custom code there. So it can get tricky at times in explaining how that works to new developers who have never worked on a PaaS platform before, new executives who have never worked on a PaaS platform before, my personal favorite, new lawyers who have never worked on a PaaS platform before. And that's really the challenge, but it's a unique challenge, and I really enjoy it because it's an opportunity to better understand what the client's needs are, and it helps us to understand what they need, and helps them to understand what we can provide and what we cannot provide as a service provider.
In our previous chat, you mentioned how you think of compliance as a result of security. I'd love to hear more about that.
Going back to the little anecdote from Security Facepalm, where I talked about the client who said they wanted to get a D- on a PCI audit. That told the story that they weren't actually interested in the real results of the audit. The purpose of compliance is to measure security. So the approach that I prefer to espouse, if you will, and I find that most people in the industry feel this way, they just don't necessarily articulate it the same way. Start with security. What is the goal of your security? Don't set the goal of your security simply by the compliance frameworks that you want to achieve. Set them by your client requirements and adjust them based on business risk. And once you've gone through that process, only then should you be thinking about, how do I stand up in compliance? And if there's a compliance requirement that may be higher than what you put into your effort, then you adjust your effort, because that becomes a business risk. It becomes a business need for that particular control. Password changing cycles, password complexity cycles, patching cycles, things like that. These are things that can vary in small but important ways between different compliance frameworks and what companies are actually able to deliver. So in delivering compliance, you have to do it from the perspective of doing the right thing in security. Only then are you truly compliant.
Currently, you're in a dual role as CISO and VP of Security at Acquia. How are the two titles different in terms of work and responsibilities and teams that you manage?
The teams that I currently manage are half operational and half compliance. As VP of Security, I feel it's my responsibility to ensure that the security operations team has all of the tools and the resources that they need to do their job effectively and meet the requirements of our security controls. The vulnerability management team also falls on that side of the house. And again, it's important that I'm able to provide them those tools. Now, the other side being compliance, I feel it necessary to have a separate team managing the compliance efforts within the organization, because there's a principle in auditing that says you cannot audit your own work. So the people who are actually doing the auditing, they're not on SecOps. They're not moving the knobs. They're not flipping the switches. They're not reading the dials. They're making certain that the people who do are doing that appropriately. And the people who are doing those things, who are reading the dials, flipping the switches, turning the knobs, it's not their job to manage the governance of it. It is their job to do their job. And by keeping those two parts of the house separate, that really, I think, helps to define the difference between a VP of security, which is, I feel, an operational role, and a chief information security officer, which is a governance role more so than an operational role. But that's my personal interpretation of the job.
When you think of managing compliance in your org, what are the top priorities in terms of systems you secure or other areas of concern?
Any system that touches data. So in any SaaS or PaaS environment, you have layers of systems that are, there are systems for control, there are systems for tests, there are systems for auditing, there are systems for logging. And following the data, I feel, is the key to setting the priorities for the security. You want to make certain that you're putting your utmost effort into putting as much security, as many different layers around the client data as possible, because that's really the brass ring in this, is to get that client data out of the system, to expose that client data. Otherwise, you wouldn't be protecting it, right? So that's where the priority lies. And all other controls flow from that. What is the goal of our security program? The goal of our security program is to protect customer data first, the confidentiality and the integrity of that data, and then to protect the availability of that data. But that has to take a backseat, I feel, to confidentiality and integrity. And that every other system is built to support that goal. And as long as you keep that goal in mind, you don't get caught up in the minutia of different people's advice about what it takes to get a control done. Focus on control intent. What do you need to accomplish? And sometimes you may be able to find a creative yet equally effective way of getting something done that works better in your new environment, such as PaaS.
In your previous answer, you were talking about treating confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data as separate things. Can you talk a little bit more about why?
It really comes down to what is the purpose of security. Availability is a very important part of security and securing any system, because data that you can't get to is useless. But it also it goes to an old adage that the most secure system in the world is the one that you never turn on or that you never put data into. So that's why I like to focus on first the confidentiality of the data, if that's an appropriate part of it, or the integrity of the data. It really depends on what the client's requirements are there. But those have to come first. And I feel if I have to sacrifice availability in order to protect that confidentiality and or integrity, as is important to the client, then that's where I'm going to focus my efforts first. Now, there is a reasonable use case where availability is more important than confidentiality and integrity, but that's dealt with on a customer by customer basis, and it becomes more of an operational question to me, making certain that you can maintain that availability through fault tolerance, high availability, BCPDR programs.
You are a practitioner of radical transparency in your role. How can CISOs and other tech leaders learn and refine this powerful skill?
I view radical transparency as absolute objective truth about what you are delivering to the customer. As a consumer of different security services, I feel that it's important that I know objectively what the state of the service that I'm consuming is, because that allows me to make informed risk decisions on my system and how my system is going to deliver. But you can't have one without the other. You cannot expect transparency without delivering transparency. And I've come to call it radical transparency because over the years, there's been a tendency to don't expose anything you don't absolutely have to. And it's not always a question of keeping the system secure. It's a question of not raising uncomfortable questions with your clients. My view is that raising uncomfortable questions with your clients is the only way you're going to improve the system. The purpose of audits, and that's the purpose of radical transparency. I feel that it's difficult in some organizations to be able to manage this. It's not always viewed very well by the sales team or the management team or the finance team. But at the end of the day, if you have built a trusted relationship between yourself and your client where they trust you to tell them when something has gone wrong or something has gone sideways. It's important for them to know that. And they need to trust that you're going to tell them that. Because if you hold that information back and then something happens to their data, you're the one that's at fault for it, for not informing them of what they need to know to make a risk-based decision. Even if, and this is the radical part, even if that risk-based decision is to find another provider. It's not the best outcome, but it's the most honest outcome.
Next up is our lightning round, and these questions are designed for you to talk at length or at short, any length of time you want to talk to these answers. So the first question is, what motivates you to get out of bed every day to do your job as a security leader?
Results. Results matter. Effort is important, but you need to make certain that your effort is directed and your effort is effective. So what motivates me to get out of bed is to get up and protect our clients' data, because I try to treat our clients' data the same way I would treat my grandmother's checking account. Don't treat it like your own data. Come on. Everybody is handing their data out via Facebook and Twitter and all the social media platforms. We will give away personal data for a free cup. Don't treat it like your own data. Treat it like grandma's data, because you wouldn't hand out grandma's social security number just to get a free t-shirt, now would you? That's what gets me out of bed.
Definitely. And when you said results, that really resonated with me. So could you give an example of the results you're looking for?
The results that I'm looking for is the ability to find a problem, resolve a problem, and then not find that problem anymore. Because the key is, I see it particularly in this industry, but this holds true in almost any industry. There are always problems. There are always things that need fixing. To me, the effectiveness in how many of the things do you actually find in the process of delivering security for your team and for your clients. Because if you're not finding anything, nobody's system is perfect. So if you don't find anything, you need to try harder. You're not quite doing your job.
What are the top 2 lessons you've learned from your team in the last year?
The first one, because of what's happened with COVID, many people in the industry are having their first turn at working from home, working in a socially isolated space. And one of the things I've learned from my team, I've learned previously, but the lesson has really been reinforced, is to maintain contact. Have those one-to-ones, not just between management and team, but between different team members. And have a one-to-one where you don't talk about work. Have a one-to-one where you talk about how your kid's doing in school, or, hey, my car is not doing well, or I'm not doing well. Because that is the connection that we lose when we're not face-to-face in the office. And we have to make an effort to make that connection. So it's the personal interaction is the biggest lesson that has been reinforced for me over this past year. The other lesson I've learned from my team has been how much more effective people can be if they don't have to drive 3 hours into the office every day on the East Coast or the West Coast. There is so much productivity that has been recovered simply because they don't have to. My company is based in Boston. People have to drive on the Mass Turnpike. That's a nightmare. That's like driving the 101 every day. And not having to do that, it adds to time that they can work. It lowers stress because they don't have to deal with idiot drivers. And in the end, I believe that it has a strong positive impact on employee satisfaction with their job.
This next question, I think, goes off of what you just said. Can you share one positive thing that's come from your teams working remotely during COVID? And the reason I want to bring up this is because I know you've been working remotely for a long time, even before the pandemic. So this is old hat to you. But I'd like to know what positive things have come from working remotely for you and your team.
As individuals, there are a number of members of this team and previous teams that had not really experienced working remotely or working from home on a regular basis. And I think for many of them, this has been an important lesson in self-discipline. I know I have to be very careful about self-discipline and not go chase the latest thing that showed up on an ad, or something that showed up in Twitter on my iPhone. And it's tempting to just, oh, hey, I'll go click through it. Oh, wait, I actually have to get back to work and finish this report. There is a difficult amount of discipline that you need to apply to yourself in doing that. And I think that's been an important lesson. And Watching the team struggle with that sometimes, whether it's my team or other teams, has informed my own approach for doing this to try and keep me on task and focused, because that's a key. Yes, I've been doing it this way for years, but that doesn't mean everyone has been doing it for years. But I think there's another important lesson that's come out of this period, and that is a lesson for senior management. There's long been, I think, a reluctance to allow the work from home model, because there was just an assumption that, hey, they're just going to slack off in their pajamas all day long and watch soap operas and eat bonbons and what have you. And it's actually proven to be quite the opposite. People are more productive. People can be more engaged. Yes, there are challenges, but there are challenges that as individuals we can rise to and we can meet. And as a team, if you work together, you can rise to and meet them and actually perhaps exceed expectations as a result. And I think that's been an important lesson for leadership at the executive level.
If you could go back to the beginning of your security career and answer one question you had then, based on your knowledge and experience now, what would that question and response be?
Patience. You cannot change the world overnight. It is eminently frustrating to be in this business at times, because we have to understand that we find a problem and we want to fix the problem quickly. And even the smallest thing can still build to a certain level of urgency internally, particularly when it's not being addressed quickly. So the lesson that I would go back and teach myself is, one, be patient. It takes time to fix things. The older they are, the longer they've been in place, the longer the practice has been going on, the more effort and time and just socialization it takes to affect change. The other thing I would go back and really pound into my skull would be, stop pursuing perfection. Sometimes good enough is good enough. Focus on the goal of the control and focus on the business risk. You can't spend $10,000 to solve a $1,000 problem. You can spend $1,000 to solve a $10,000 problem, and understand what that difference is. Understand and learn what it means to accept risk. That could be the hardest challenge, and that would be the biggest lesson that I would go back and try and teach myself.
So I love what you just said about accepting risk. Can you get into that a little bit more?
Accepting risk is a case of, okay, a good example, riding a motorcycle. I love riding motorcycles. When I was younger, I really loved riding motorcycles. I had a number of friends who had some very serious accidents. And every time that happened, I had to step back and I had to do a risk reward calculation. And for the longest time, I chose to accept the risk. I didn't have any children, so I didn't have as much to lose if I got into an accident. As time wore on, my personal take on the universe required me to be a bit more cautious. And as I watched the folks around me here in Michigan start riding without helmets, which I personally, that's not something I could do. I feel naked on a motorcycle without a helmet. But that's a risk decision that person has made. And that's the key, risk acceptance. Understand what your appetite for risk is, and understand that should the consequences turn out the way you didn't want, you still have to accept responsibility for having accepted that risk. That's what risk acceptance is. And it can be hard to actually work your way through that. And it can be just as hard to make a risk decision not to accept a risk as it can be to accept a risk. So it's the lottery problem. Everybody plays the lottery because they think they're going to win, right? Everybody who goes cliff diving does so because they don't think they're going to break their neck. Positive outcome, negative outcome. Risk acceptance is about weighing the possibilities and understanding what you truly are willing to accept as a risk.
So I heard you're starting a podcast. I would love to hear more about the podcast from you.
Still in the idea phase right now, and frankly, giving me the opportunity and the excuse to buy more equipment. Who doesn't want more toys? What I'm going for is ultimately going to be a semi-comedic take on security and compliance. I have an unusual sense of humor, and it comes out in some almost inappropriate times during conversations, but it also has served me well to diffuse difficult and tense situations. So the way I've been explaining this to people is my goal is to put together a short podcast, topic driven, but with an approach that kind of blends Lewis Black style of curmudgeonly yelling and early Dennis Miller, almost, what's the word I'm looking for here? Arrogant intelligence that comes into it, because you're not taking yourself too seriously when you do that. And I like to think that helps to get the point across. We'll see. We'll see whether or not I can pull it up. We'll see whether or not I can get the writing done for it. It's very much a work in progress, but I'm hoping that I can get this off the ground in the next few months.
Awesome.
And no, I don't have a name for
it. Great. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. So we'll definitely update the show notes to add links to that podcast, because I think it's going to be great. So on that note, do you have anything else you'd like to promote, like social media channels, articles you've written, pieces from your team, or anything?
I've seen a number of folks on Twitter who have done a fantastic job of doing a positive take on security and compliance. Swift on Security is one of my favorites. I love Swift on Security. Accidental CISO is another one that I've been following. I think that particular individual has had some really good takes. Wolfgang Gerlich. I love following Wolfgang because he's a pragmatist from the word go. So there are a lot of good authors, if you will, or influencers, I guess is the term, on Twitter that I've been following. I've also found some frankly amusing stuff in some of the subreddits. Some of them get pretty inappropriate at times, but it's amusing to me. I've written some articles. They're relatively easy to find. My team hasn't had much of an opportunity to do that yet. We're working toward that. I guess the only other thing I would say is if you can find your way to either the Security Facepalm blog or the Security Sock Monkey Twitter account, those are places where I let off steam, frankly. I used to try and do it anonymously because I didn't want the attribution of some of the things I was saying to get back to me because of getting back to my job. Instead, I'm a little more generic about what I say in there now. And that's sort of the lead up to the podcast.
Awesome. Yeah. Like I said, I'm totally looking forward to it, and we will make sure our listeners can access that. Thank you, Robert. It's been so amazing talking with you, and I hope to see you again soon, maybe on your podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'd be glad to have you on board with the podcast because I'm certain you could ask some pointed questions of me that I could answer in a far more amusing way.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to CISO Insider, a podcast created and sponsored by Nightfall AI, the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. The ratings and reviews help more people find us. Special thanks to Wendell Topper for podcast production support. Learn more about Wendell's work at www.createch.us. That's CREATEK.us. Follow Nightfall on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Nightfall AI. That's Nightfall AI, and email us at marketing@nightfall.ai with questions, feedback, and suggestions about CISO Insider, including suggestions for CISOs you'd like to hear from. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next time.